Hmm. This topic of this matter of self-improvement is a very daunting topic, very challenging topic, and while we must admit pretty much all the topics that we have been considering in these sessions are challenging for all of them actually deal with something very fundamental about human life. This evening's topic is explicitly so. No one can miss the challenging nature of this topic, especially when, without any delay, we share what Krishnaji has said about self improvement. He has said in no uncertain terms, without mincing words, sorrow does not come to end by self improvement. Sorrow comes to end only with ending of self. This is a very seminal statement by Krishnaji in this context. The whole world is agog with excitement about self improvement. In the name of improving ourselves, people either attend all kinds of workshops, programs, and so on, or conduct and make a lot of money. So, those who tell others, we will tell you how to go for self improvement, or those who believe that they are now on the ramp of self improvement, are both mistaken. There is a humorous example of some theft taking place in a little town, and then everybody is agitated, saying, our town never had such theft before. Now there is a theft here. Oh my. And then they see that a policeman on a motorbike is going through all the streets and lanes of the town in a big hunt for the thief. I'm going to find out who the thief is. The policeman is saying to everybody, and the people of the town are very hopeful that this enthusiastic policeman on an excellent motorbike, which also looks impressive, is soon going to find the thief. Now, without making the story long, it so turns out that that policeman himself was the thief who wore the clothes of a policeman and was going round. Likewise, we are talking of self improvement, and who wants the self improvement? The self, and the self is the problem. The self that is hoping to get better initially materially. I am earning so much per month, I will improve myself and earn 10 times. Just watch out. Mind when one is in the so called materialistic realm. Now, again, using that adjective so called, I would say when you and I are active in the so called spiritual realm, there also we say to others and we say to ourselves, pretty soon I should be much better than now. My anger, my lust, my jealousy, my insecurity, I tell you, are coming down. I just returned from a trip to Kashi or Himalayas somewhere, and I had a great experience there. I tell you, I am now changing, just and so on. So, whom is one hoodwinking? Whom is one deceiving? This self improvement is one of the fundamental rackets of human life. Therefore, we need not make a distinction between the materialistic realm and the so called spiritual realm, for to advance materially or to advance spiritually, the basic element that is involved is the self. And like there is that expression, rat race, and they say about the rat race, even the winner in a rat race is a rat. A winner or the winner in the rat race is a rat. Therefore, friends, while examples and metaphors and picturesque language expressions can all be given one after another, and anybody with a little gift of the gab can engage an audience going on this topic, it would not be fair to just go around like that. We must take this matter seriously. The self is a construction of thought, and this construction of thought, without questioning itself, creates a framework. It compares with others, it sets certain standards, maybe by reading a book, maybe by reading the biography of somebody who got enlightened or whatever. The thinking machine, this thought, again prepares or places certain parameters before it and goes on striving towards self improvement. Meanwhile, just as the policeman's motorbike goes round and round in the town, the thief, who himself is the policeman, is sitting pretty on the motorbike. The thought created self is going strong, is well seated on the motorbike of thinking process. Therefore, words, descriptions, models, yet another way of putting it, etc., can be all deception. So, what do we mean by ending of the self? So, we have two expressions here, self improvement and ending of the self. This expression too is not to be taken just for its face value. We should not get carried away by the special flavor it has. Ending, yes, I want to just end the self. I want to be free from this self. And that will take me beyond somewhere, etc. That's another trick that the mind will play upon itself. Therefore, looking at this expression, ending of the self, it seems to us that these lofty teachings, which which speak the plain truth, we are calling these teachings the lofty teachings because they call a spade a spade. They do not, in order to satisfy an audience or to satisfy the so-called student or follower or anybody, they do not cut corners. They do not compromise with the truth of the matter. So these lofty teachings question the very basis of this self-improvement. The moment the fancy of self-improvement hits us or seizes us, can we question that very fancy? Why do I want self-improvement. There are probably people who have improved themselves. Are they free of sorrow? People who have gone from rags to riches materially. People have started as a simple priest and become heads of huge religious organizations, which is so called spirituality. They have now thousands or tens of thousands followers, or their books have sold in millions. They are interviewed by great TV anchors. Just the other day, she or he was at BBC, do you know? Come on. The fundamental question is these people who have improved themselves and become somebody in the society, are they free from sorrow? Are they free from fear? Quite possibly, or most likely, is the case that they are not. They are caught in their own machine. They are in the process of becoming, and it is so tiring up there. Therefore, we must very clearly see that the idea of I was on scale 4 and with sincere self effort, or somebody may want to use God's grace, whatever you may use, I came to level 7 on the scale of 10. And very soon I will be reaching 8 and 9, etc. This whole scale itself is in the realm of illusion. The scale itself is to be questioned. Is it possible for us to let go of this ambition? Earlier, there was the ambition of making money or being in limelight. Now we have the ambition of self improvement to the pinnacle of where the self can reach, apparently. So, is it possible to let go of this very fancy, let go of this very desire to become, when not through deciding to let go, but by seeing the falsity of the self, by questioning and smelling something foul about this self itself, by seeing how it is a bundle of conditionings, by seeing how something I read is operating, some memory might be operating, something somebody told me has left me disturbed, something I read in the newspaper or watched on the TV, where somebody was described as having a great time somewhere, and I started feeling so miserable. Look at that
बात का
classmate of mine.
बात में कोई प्रॉब्लम नहीं। चलो आप आए, अच्छा लगा मेरे को।
नहीं बिल्कुल और कुछ हो तो बताइए।
हाँ बिल्कुल बिल्कुल, आपके अलावा किसको बताऊं?
नहीं
So, what I mean by something disturbed us is something like that. I come to know some classmate of mine has just now bought a huge bungalow in near Los Angeles, very near Beverly Hills, where all the Hollywood stars live. Oh my God, I have not been able to even buy. I live in a rented house in Hyderabad, and this guy has a huge bungalow in Sherman Oaks near Beverly Hills, near Los Angeles. I must improve myself. That is how a disturbed self, a wounded self, a self that is as though pierced by an arrow, begins to dream of self improvement. And at that point of time, quite possibly, this injured ego decides unless I have as big a bungalow in the same Hollywood area in USA, I'm not going to quit. I'm going to put in more efforts from today. And all this goes on in this confused and conditioned mind. So one sees that the limited intelligence of this mind is playing game after game. The limited intelligence of this human mind, which I have, which every human being has, is again and again getting into a new trap, and all that is happening when one is lacking in quiet observation. Therefore, rather than placing a goal of in 10 days, I'm going to be free of anger. Give me 2 months, I will be free of lust. And give me 1 year, I will be free of all insecurity. For that, any price that is required, I am ready to pay it, blah, blah. All that, rather than all that rhetoric, you and I tend to sometimes permit such rhetoric in our own mind. Rather than that, can we ask ourselves, hold on, who is feeling insecure? I. I means what? What is this I? What is this self? Now, I may be using some words to sort of describe, but it is not about bringing more and more words like that, but it is about quietly noticing the operation of the self, quietly questioning the credentials of the self, quietly shaking the very foundations of the entity that has rolled out a plan for self improvement and reaching somewhere and then shining, outshining everyone else, and so on and so forth. I am questioning the credentials of this entity. Then something different could happen. Therefore, by way of a few concluding words, I do not claim to have fully understood, all this matter. I am, as is expected of anybody in these discussions, I am also sharing what comes to my mind, and I may have used many expressions, but that is no guarantee that I have gone to the depth of the matter. But I'm sharing with you how that very, very powerful statement by Krishnaji. Sorrow does not end by self improvement, sorrow ends by ending of the self. To me, it seems that a hint is given to a leap in consciousness. I may call it a quantum leap, as though there is the realm of the operation of the self, and then right here in you and me, there could be, perhaps there is, the realm, the plane of freedom from the self. And by that second part of that quote, sorrow ends by the ending of the self, Krishnaji seems to tell us on our face that we are taking a leap rather than chasing a dream, working within that illusory dream. In the dream, if somebody becomes a billionaire, of what value is it? Dream is a dream, all said and done. Therefore, there is a hint to a possible leap in our way of being, our being. Our being presently is in the clutches of numerous conditionings. Can that being, can that existence of ours be freed from those conditionings? Seems to be the crucial question here. Let me pause, and I guess Sushil Jain wants me to take some questions at this time.
Yeah,
I'm
definitely,
here up to,
definitely.
yeah, so that people also remember whatever I have said. But let
Yeah,
it not be too long. Some 10 minutes I'll attempt a couple
15,
of questions,
15.
and I myself eager to hear Harshadji, Harshji, and a couple of others here, whoever may share their thoughts. Yeah, Dinesh raised his hand.
Thank you.
माइक अनम्यूट करके बोल दीजिए दिनेश जी, माइक अनम्यूट करना है.
Sir,
Yeah.
self-improvement is also the improvement of the quality of self, isn't it?
Oh, that's a very
Un-
good point you have raised.
Unless,
You know,
and
yeah,
let me, sir,
when we say, yeah, I think I should have touched it in my talk. That's a very practical point you have raised. Suppose some of our skills are poor, my driving skill, my speaking skill, my writing skill, my cooking skill, and a number of skills are, poor somewhere, and my friends are suffering because of it. Imagine I prepare a meal for people and they, they say, what kind, you didn't put enough salt, etc. Now that self-improvement, nobody is questioning, you know, that is improvement of skills, which is a part of our functional living, uh, has its place. But we are questioning, let me say this sentence, conclude my answer. We are questioning that psychological domain where we imagine I am a bad person and very soon I will be a good person. Give me some time, I will be a noble person. So, what is this bad? What is this good? What is this noble? What is this pious? These are psychological terms. I'm a bad cook, and give me some time, very soon I'll prepare a meal for you with no, no extra salt or forgetting salt. That is function. It's not
sir,
psychological.
what I am trying to ask, this understanding of Krishnamurti and improving the this what is conditioning, why the mind should be quiet and all that. This understanding is also a part of improvement, self-improvement, isn't it? Because unless
Mhm.
the things are clear to your intellect first, then only you can go ahead, isn't it?
Yeah,
Then
there
only
I
you can
would
move
agree with
forward.
you. That is, perhaps what you are talking is some erroneous notions, some bits and pieces, or even chunks of, let's say, false prestige, etc., drop off. So that dropping off is certainly healthy, but we don't call that as self-improvement leading to ending of sorrow.
That's right.
The complete ending of sorrow uh, it doesn't happen by some window dressing. Let's say I was very proud of the college where I had studied. Then all of you taught me some lessons, and nowadays I no more talk about my great college. I have become humble. That doesn't come bring about ending of sorrow. Yeah,
So
in a
this,
certain aspect of my,
here also, I would like to say that sorrow is not like a memory, or this is not a conditioning. Sorrow is also situational dependent. So sorrow may not end, but if I ends, then you may be free of sorrow. That is a different thing. But sorrow will remain. Freedom
no,
from
we are.
sorrow and sorrow itself is a different thing. Both things are different, isn't it?
I think
What do you have to say?
that's another good question you have raised. I think by sorrow here we mean uh, a certain inner discomfort which will stay with me wherever I go. I change my place, Bangalore to Kolkata. I change my company. I change my ashram. You know, many changes I make in my life. Still, deep inside me, a certain discomfort continues. And now that is the sorrow we are talking of. Will that sorrow end by some technique, by becoming less angry or controlling, keeping under check certain emotions for a length
No,
of
but sir,
time.
sir, this automatically means what Krishnamurti is referring, that ending of sorrow is different, not this general sorrow, what we are talking.
No, no. He is talking of the more important sorrow. The sorrow, as I explained, which doesn't leave us like a shadow, it continues, it follows us. He is talking of ending of that sorrow which follows us like our own shadow. You know, like I gave the materialistic example, somebody went from rags to riches. And no matter how rich he became, what a celebrity he became, from childhood he had a certain sense of inadequacy that has not left him even now. Krishnamurti talks of how that can come to an end.
Pradeep Verma
Okay,
ji,
thank you, sir.
please,
Thank you.
please, please let Pradeep Verma ask the question.
Please, yeah. Pradeep Verma, hand lowered. Yeah. Oh, your mic has to be turned on, Pradeep ji. प्रदीप वर्मा कुछ बोल नहीं रहे हैं.
हाँ बोल पर म्यूट अनम्यूट करने में टाइम लगा सॉरी
हाँ समझ ठीक है अब
आई
बोलिए.
वंडर इज इट ऑडिबल नाउ
वेरी वेल.
आई वंडर whether questioning of self whether questioning of self is done by some other than self. Is it that? Because consciousness and self is store of things we have accumulated, part of content of consciousness. My question is whether questioning self is done by other than self.
Here we hear about certain intelligence that operates, that observes, but not all are able to look at the self and question the self with all that maturity. Many a time, a thought questioning another thought, but I would imagine that if it is a thought questioning another thought, that's not a deep enough affair. When there is observation in silence, and what is said, you begin with freedom at the very beginning. If thought is questioning thought, then the thought that is questioning is not free. It is already conditioned. Therefore, there
You
is
mean to say, Swamiji, you mean to say that it is awareness?
awareness, intelligence, or maybe no word is necessary. You question the thought. Yeah. And you are not necessarily a bundle of thoughts. You are not necessarily a bundle of thoughts. You operate generally as a bundle of thoughts. The self is a bundle of thoughts. The self is a creation of thought. But are you a creation of thought? It becomes a mystical question, really.
This is interesting, yes.
Because any word you use, there will be a further question. What do you mean by that word? If the word intelligence is used, what do you mean by intelligence?
Thank you, Swamiji. Thank you.
Thank you too. So one last question and then we'll hear maybe Harshad ji, if there is another last question or a comment even.
Harsh Tankha sir, would you please comment something?
माइक ऑन करना है, माइक भी म्यूट पर है.
Okay. I mean, I think rather than make just a simple comment, I would say after Harshad ji has spoken, if I have a chance, I will say something at little greater length. Yeah.
Thanks, sir. Thanks. Parekh sir, Harshad Parekh sir, please unmute. Harshad Parekh
Yes.
sir.
Yes. Are you able to hear my voice?
Yes, sir, we are able to.
Okay. Swamiji has explained very, very well. The self is created by thinking, because that is what I feel, and that is also Krishna ji also says that thinking cannot solve our problems. And Krishna ji said thinking is the problem. But this is a very, very strong statement of Krishna ji, because to see that thinking is the problem, one needs the freedom at the beginning to see that yes, Swamiji spoke in a very impersonal language, but I would like to speak a little bit about how I felt when I read Krishnamurti. And Krishnaji starts with the problems which exist in the world, like violence or fear, anger, jealousy, all that problem. And then he shows that the root cause of all these problems of fear, anger, jealousy, he said that everything is starting from thinking. And he said that from thinking comes this sense of self, I, me. It comes from thinking. And once this sense of I or me comes, then it wants to change thinking and says, I want this, I don't want that. So there is a conflict which starts between the thinker, that means I, and the thought. And thought is the source. So how can one look at this statement of Krishnaji and to look at thought clearly, the beginning of a thought, one needs the freedom to look and to have that freedom, one needs a great sense of curiosity, attent, attentiveness, and the whole energy is looking at the beginning of a thought. And when I try to do that, my mind stopped. That was a long time ago. And I felt that yes, when there is no thinking, there is not even this sense of self which wants to become better. And the senses are functioning very well. And it is a wonderful state of freedom. But it seems to me that this sense of freedom is very frightening for most people because we are used to this idea of me. I want to become somebody. And when that me ends, it is like a psychological death. There is no sense of I, and a psychological death is very frightening. And probably that is what is preventing people to see clearly how thoughts are creating problems in our daily relationship also, like anger. Somebody says something and I immediately get angry and I react and I start a fight with the other person. And the whole thing is so automatic that we get involved in thinking of the reality of this I or me, which gets hurt. So unless a person questions what is this I which gets hurt, there are some images built, and to look at all that, it requires the freedom from the self to look at how the self is arising. And that is our difficulty, that we don't have this freedom at the beginning to look at the beginning of the self and the problems created by the self. So sometimes I give some kind of a metaphor, like if you are in the mud and the mud is very, very soft, and you try to come out from the mud, then you sink deeper. If you are on the strong floor, cement floor, if you want to jump, you have to press the floor and the floor will press you and you jump. But if you are in the mud, very soft mud, and you try to do, you sink deeper. So our thinking is like that soft mud. The more we try to come out from it, we sink deeper in thinking. And then there are many problems, conflicts arise. So to see all that is possible for human beings, but that requires something other than thinking, which Krishnaji calls it awareness or intelligence or choiceless awareness. And as long as this awareness is not ignited in our life, if it has not come into operation, we will remain in the world of thinking and the self and the improvement of the self, which may lead to more conflict. So self cannot be ended by self, but it can end when there is a new dimension called awareness or choiceless awareness or intelligence, which is not of the nature of thinking and feeling. It is like coming above the plane of thinking and feeling and then looking at thinking and feeling very clearly. So that is our problem. This is the real challenge. And I feel that the pointers which Krishnaji is giving are good pointers. And all one needs is a passion to look inward, because our education is such that our intellect is developed very highly. And with that intellect, we are trying to solve the problem which are outside, or engineering problem or environmental problem or scientific, and developing more and more material energy. But the development of intelligence. That intelligence which can look inwardly at the beginning of the problem, that is not developed in our education system. It actually tries to make us escape from ourselves and involve in outward activities. And only when a person who gets hurt psychologically feels very angry, at that time the question arises to this person, maybe a student, what is this anger? What is behind it? I really go right. I want to go right at the source. And that is what all spiritual teachers like Krishna ji or Raman Maharshi or other spiritual teachers, they are saying that we are not body, we are not mind, but there is something apart from body and mind, which we may call intelligence or awareness. So the journey, if we call it spiritual journey, is coming to that dimension where thinking and feelings are looked very clearly at the source where it arises. And then it is possible to be free of many, many problems which we create for ourselves. Even fear, uh, most of our fears are imagined. What will happen? Corona problem, it comes from thinking only. So when we realize that the fear of corona is not actual fear, but it is coming from thinking, and so on, desire and anger and jealousy, all that problem, the root is the self, and the self comes from thinking. And so one has to look at the beginning of thinking, and that requires freedom from thinking, and that is awareness or intelligence. So I have finished. Thank you.
Tankha sir, please. Ask Tankha sir, please.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah, very well.
Okay. So just let me. I mean, Chidanandaji and Harshadji have said a lot. One from a general perspective and one from a more personal perspective, which just underlines the difficulty of this question. And it's particularly difficult because I think for a group like ours, because of what Krishnaji has said. He has clearly said, and we respect what he says. We are inclined, I won't say to believe him, but if he says something, then we want to examine it and see whether it's true. We're not going to disregard it and say it's rubbish. So when he says that this gradual improvement through effort and discipline and in time improving your grade until you reach maybe 8 or 9 or 10, and then maybe you die, and then in the next life you get up to 10. So it's that is around. That's in our minds. That is in everybody's mind. So it's very difficult for us without taking him as authority. Because if we take him as authority and say, oh yes, I'm convinced now that the ending of the self is necessary to come to the end of sorrow, then I'm just using him as an authority. I haven't seen it for myself. And Harshadji has very clearly explained how to see this for yourself, intelligence has to operate. That unless if it can't be one part of the self looking at another part of the self, not the self observing itself, but something beyond the self. That is, intelligence is observing the self. So do we have this intelligence? So the question, saying that immediately, because our minds are like that. So what do I have to do to get this intelligence? And we are back in this self-improvement game. Our minds are very ready to jump into this. Maybe if I meditate, maybe if all that will lead to the intelligence which is necessary to see the functioning of the self. So I think one thing that we understand is that it's no good trying to speculate or even talk about something that is not real for us. That we have to start by talking about what is. And what is all that is happening around us. What is of self-improvement? What is happening with self-improvement? So some things are very clear. Self-improvement involves this. Firstly, it involves authority. Generally, our usual ideas of self-improvement involve authority. We think, okay, this is what I have to do. Either I go to a guru or I read a book, or it comes from somewhere else, some steps that I have to take to improve myself. So there's that. Then, because our minds are structured that way, there is the idea of measurement. Am I getting better? Will this make me better? And there is, as Krishnaji has said, the better is the enemy of the good. So you can't reach the good by better. So we are just thinking in terms of measure. So we actually have to be asking ourselves, each of us personally, why we are even talking about self-improvement. What is, and it may be different for each of us. We have to look actually, what is the reason that we have come to this point where we think that something has to be done about this self? Is it, for some, it is the ending of sorrow. Maybe there's a loss, there have been debts, they are consumed by that. And they don't know what to do with the sorrow. So maybe they are looking for the ending of sorrow. But somebody else may be looking at, I don't know, failed relationships, problems with their children. So they're not thinking so much about sorrow. They're looking to see, how do you have relationship? And then the question becomes to them, really the question of love. Krishnaji, once again, will come to the same point. The ending of the self is, if you're self-interested and self-centered, then relationship becomes impossible. So, but I think it's necessary for each of us in a very real way to track exactly what is going on in our minds, to start observing, to start seeing, and not start by saying, oh, I must have intelligence before I can even start, because then we'll never start. Or then we'll ask the question, what do I have to get intelligence? So to begin with looking at what is it that is in us that is wanting self-improvement? Is it because I've read about it in a book? Is it something about some fanciful dream, or is it some problems in my own life, which usually is the thing that drives people to examining themselves and doubting what is going on. And saying all of this, I think I should also say a little bit about, let's not wash everything away. I think it's worth, as you look and this whole question of self-improvement, you see that it does kind of make sense. I mean, there are people who have psychological problems, people who are, anger and violence. And even courts, when people are angry and violent, they say, oh, you have to have anger management classes. And anger management classes sort of work. And they do help people to come to terms with their anger or with their violence and diminish their anger and violence. So yes, there is a way in which whatever happens is done by psychologists and psychiatrists, does change things and make things better. PTSD, people who have been in very violent situations, they get flashbacks, all of a sudden the whole scene, because it's recorded so strongly and deeply in their brain that at times it just suddenly comes up and it just takes over reality. So they think they're back in that situation, getting shot or caught up in an accident or whatever. So now all of this is, of course, points to the question of conditioning. But I think we should recognize that there is a way in which psychiatrists and psychologists and so on have some kind of idea, but that's all caught up in thought and measure and so on, and will only go so far and will not go very far. But it has a use, so we shouldn't dismiss it all completely. Even spiritual people who talk about meditation, about sitting quietly, about various practices to quiet the mind, to settle the emotions, to observe. I mean, all these are practices that are fairly widespread in different religions and different, the need for the quiet mind. So even these are actually catching an echo of what Krishnaji is talking about. A silent mind, a conditioning that psychiatrists, when they have a talking cure, they call it psychiatry the talking cure, because what they do in psychiatry is they help people. They have the idea that something in the past, some bad experience, the way they were treated by their father or mother, or has affected them. And that conditioning is blocking them from being able to act well now. So what is the technique they use generally? They get them to talk about it. They get them to look at it, essentially. They get them to go back, observe, and they usually try and avoid talking about it because it was painful or they don't want to remember it. But it's essentially the same thing. They are encouraging them to look at the self, to look at themselves, to look at these deep conditionings, to bring them up, to bring them out. So there is an echo there even of what Krishnaji is talking about. So I think if we are interested in in the whole question of self, we can't start by saying we want to end the self. We have to look at the whole action of the self. And in particular, we have to look at how the self is created and actually how it is being created all the time. We are changing, the self is changing, the idea of the self is changing. Moment to moment, every experience, everything that occurs it's a dynamic thing. And to observe that whole thing and then to observe if there really is a fixed self, which I can call me. If there really is, if the self is like a container, you see, because we have a body and the body has a skin, and then we see from the skin that our bodies are separate, but in some senses the same. So I can understand how my heart and lungs function by seeing how the heart and lungs of another person function. But is the mind the same way, that there's some kind of box which is called me, and that box, inside the box are all a set of thought processes that are going on: anger, fear, violence, and these thought processes are similar to those of others? Or are there are no walls there, that there is a continuous flow backwards and forwards, in and out, modifying the self? So one of the problems of self-improvement is that if there isn't this kind of box that is the self, like we have for the body, so it is my body definitely, though it's very similar to yours. Whether the self is divided in that way, whether we are individual selves in that way, that's an important question for us to actually understand. So it's basically what I'm suggesting is that it is by examining the whole movement of the self, even those things which we at the moment might consider misguided attempts to improve the self, even those give us a clue to the whole functioning of the self. And then beginning to be aware of the whole functioning of the self and its creation and destruction is the point at which we can begin to see. And that is what we can do. So I think that is what I want to say.
Thank you. Dinesh Wagmare wanted to ask a question. Please unmute and ask. Dinesh Wagmare.
So my question is, Tankha sir,
Yes.
is understanding the thought. Understanding is thought.
Yes. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, these are all words, right? And obviously I'm trying to describe something. But I think I started by saying, which is that each of us really needs to be examining this for ourselves from whatever gives us the energy or impetus to be able to. It may be, as I said, because I'm consumed by sorrow and I want out. It may be because of bad relationships. It may be I see the world as such a mess and I ask myself, what can happen? Why is the world such a mess? Why aren't people more sensible? So, but it has to be something that for each person has the kind of energy of wanting to go through to the end. Not something that you think about one day and, yes, it's an interesting question. How can the self come to an end? Yes, I see. Yeah, I can see, yes, there would be a problem here. See, if it's just that, then the inquiry will stay superficial. But I'm now really, then after that, I was really just talking about some of the things that I see when I start trying to understand the self. That I see that even the psychiatrists and the spiritual people have some kind of inkling about conditioning and about the necessity of observing oneself and about the quiet mind. So there's even there, because I'm trying to understand what the self is about. I'm trying to see, whatever you want to say. I'm trying to observe. Whatever word you want to use. I'm inquiring into the self. And of course, part of inquiring into the self, I'm also asking, how does one inquire into the self? That's part of it. So I'm learning all the time. So this is part of learning about the self. And so maybe learning about the self is better than understanding the self. So this is learning about the self. I'm not learning like accumulation, but learning as a process, something that is going on, not something that I'm accumulating. So in that process of that learning, I'm offering certain things that I see about psychiatrists, about this, about whether there is such a thing as a self which is separate, like a box, separate from yourself and myself, like my body and your body, even though similar, but different. So we can talk about anger and desire and sorrow, like we talk about heart and lungs, because I've got heart lungs and you got heart lungs. But still the self is separate. Whether that's so. So that for me is a question at the moment. Is that so? That this, just like our bodies are separate, are the selves separate? And is my self continuous? Do I have something called Harsh that has been the same all the way through? It doesn't appear like that to me. It appears to me the self is always fluxing, in flux and changing. So I'm merely telling you what appears to me like. But at the same time, I'm saying you need to look at these things and see whether what I'm saying makes any sense to you or not.
I also want to explore one
Pradeep
thing.
Verma ji.
Really, whether
Pradeep Verma ji.
thought is the source of.
Pradeep Verma. Wagmare after Pradeep Verma. Let
Okay,
Pradeep
okay.
finish, then you ask. Pradeep Verma ji, please unmute and ask.
Ah. Audible, sir? Is it audible?
Audible, very good.
Okay.
Well audible.
My simple question is how to negate or do anything with something which is ever changing, as you said. What is also changing, and the so-called me as self is also changing. So how to do anything about this? That is a simple question to me.
I think if you are learning about the self, this is not such a simple question. And the question of ending may not be, see, the trouble with talking about ending, it gives the impression of ending in time, that at such and such a moment, I will end this self, right? That is the impression it gives. But I would suggest that this is not how ending of the self. Today, of course, I'm going to say, I'm going to the airport tomorrow, or I'm going to do this, or I like this kind of food, or this is what I eat. So did Krishna ji talk like that. So does ending of the self mean the ending of there? And I'm talking English because this is the accumulation of my memories. I can't say all this in Hindi easily. I can speak Hindi. I certainly can't say it in French. So there is some kind of self there operating. But the question is, as I think Krishna said, is there something like intelligence that is using the self? Or is the self running on automatic? Because the self also runs on automatic. You know, one thought or mechanically, one thought after the other, like a machine. In fact, that is very often the mode of operation of the self is automatic. Somebody says something, I reply. Somebody says, good morning, how are you? I say, yeah, hello, how are you? Somebody says, your name is this. A lot of it is of what is our daily interactions, our daily actions are automatic, right? They don't involve great intelligence. They don't involve great, it's just recorded in my thought, how to react, their reactions. So, you know, those things are going on, the uses, but whether, you know, the words I'm speaking, there used to be in school, one of the earliest things I remember for our school assembly, there was a Tagore poem that we used to recite. and that it said, uh, just quote to her, where words come out from the depths of truth, and into that heaven of freedom, let my country awake. So this is the question: are these words coming from? It's a question for me all the time. Coming from some depth of truth, or are these words just automatic repetitions of what I've learned, or what I've seen, or what is very easy to repeat what Krishnamurti has said. It's so I'm not sure that this ending of the self, I think one has to really look very hard at what is meant by ending the self. Certainly not ending in time, certainly not an abrupt end of today I'm in the self, tomorrow I'm not. Yeah.
Harshad Parekh
Sorry,
wanted to add something.
one
Harshad,
related question, one small
Harshad,
related question.
sir, Harshad Parekh has intervened and he wanted to say something. First listen him
Okay.
and then ask.
Yeah.
Okay.
Are
No
you
problem.
able?
Yeah, we are
Are you
able
able
to
to?
listen. Yeah, we
Yes.
are able to.
After we learned the language and we became very fluent with speaking the language, then speaking, thinking has become a habit. And we are not aware, and the thoughts are going on by itself. But when we become very curious and ask a question that is it possible to look at the beginning of a thought? And at that time, when all our energy, attention is directed inward, then maybe something happens. Thought, thinking may even stop. And at that time, either there is a fear of ending of me itself, or there is a sense of freedom. That is what I feel. And many people told me that this ending of the self, it creates fear. But that is what the real freedom is, I feel. And I give that story of Swami Vivekananda when he was a boy and about 17, 18 years old, he came to Ramakrishna. Ramakrishna touched him and he went into a different state as if there was no sense of self. And he got frightened and he said to Ramakrishna, what are you doing to me? I have father, mother. So as long as there is some kind of attachment exists in our mind to people, to properties, to some ideas, then the ending of self creates fear. So that is why maybe it is a very rare event. Very, very few people are able to come out from the thinking and looking at thinking as it is coming on. Because in that there is a key, because then we will know when exactly the problem starts, whether it is a fear or anger or jealousy. So one has to be in that state of looking all the time, because when we are not looking, all these problems will come and the thinking will multiply it. And so that is what are really happening in the life of human beings, that we are getting caught into thinking and the problems created by the self. So something else needs to be coming into existence, something which is hidden under the dense layers of thinking. There is this intelligence or awareness is hidden under. And when we become silent, that means when there is a discontinuity in our thinking, a gap is created between two thoughts, and then that awareness may come through that gap and come above, and then it can look at thinking clearly. So this awareness or intelligence is hidden under the dense clouds of thinking, and which has become like a habit because we are very fluent in speaking language, and also we are using too much language, intellect. So that is the problem. Okay, I finish.
Sir, I want to ask one question.
Pradeep, please,
I'm
please, Wagmare, please, Wagmare, please, Wagmare, please, Wagmare. Let Pradeep Verma say, I stopped him. Pradeep Verma ji, please. Pradeep Verma ji, unmute and say.
Yes. Okay. Again, I have to unmute. Just
no,
it is
we are able
unmuted.
to listen to you.
Yes.
And
Listen to. Tankha ji just said that intelligence is using self. If intelligence is using self, then everything will be all right. Unless until from somewhere intellect comes in, which is whether a part of intelligence, I don't know. But if intelligence is using self, then everything should go all right. Awareness, part of awareness or intelligence. But somewhere in between, this intellect, I'm using this because I have borrowed it from somewhere, that it cuts and it divides and something like that. So is it intelligence using self, or where from this intellect comes in suddenly?
Well, if I understand you correctly, I would try and say that differently. Intelligence is when Krishnaji is talking, and we accept that he is talking from some depth of truth, from some perception beyond thought. He is just still using his intellect. His intellect is in play. His intellect is finding the words and attempting to describe what he's talking about. Yeah. So the intellect is in play. So this kind of sharp division, but it's possible to be caught up in the intellect. That what I mean by being caught up in the intellect is that thoughts and words are no longer coming from direct perception, immediate perception, but they're coming from other thoughts, right? From memory. So that when we say, we talk about the ending of the self, we are not talking about the ending of the self. We may not be talking about the ending of the self because we've seen the ending of the self. We are talking about what we remember. It's coming from our memory of what Krishnamurti had to say about ending of the self. So when the intellect itself is the source, this is what being caught up in the intellect means. But when some perception of truth is the source, which is then the intellect is trying to describe using words, definitely. Imperfect, it's always imperfect. That has the ring of truth.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
May I
Can I
say-
ask Mr. Harshad Parekh a
Wagmare,
question?
Wagmare, sir.
Okay.
Wagmare, sir, you wanted to ask, and then Harshad Parekh, sir.
Okay.
Wagmare,
Yeah. Can I ask?
Yes, yes, yes.
why not? Why not?
Harshad
You are
Parekh, sir,
welcome.
my problem is I am having a boundary and I am inadequate. That is what my problem is. Thought is only enhancing it, or thought is only verbalizing it. So you are saying that thought is the source of problem.
Yes.
But I don't have that direct perception that thought is my problem. Thought is only enhancing, or it is a breeding, we can say.
That is
problem.
what happens. That is what is happening to most human beings. And that's why we see so many problems in the world. Everybody is fighting, even in the family. Countries are fighting. In the family, there is a fight. Because that dimension of intelligence has not come into existence, and then this intellect is operating and it is dividing in the name of religion, nationality, caste. All this is happening because that intelligence is not awakened, and Krishnaji's teachings is about the awakening of intelligence, which is a higher dimension than the intellect. And with this intelligence, intellect can function very smoothly. But without intelligence, intellect will create many problems. Now, when you listen to Krishnaji, you will feel that there is a gap between his sentences, between his words, and there is a kind of a clarity. And I don't think that he is making any effort in speaking. Everything is coming spontaneously, beautifully, clearly, because it is coming from intelligence. So that is the difference. And so intellect is the problem. Intellect is a problem. Though it can help in solving many problems of science and mathematics and all that. But in the psychological field, intellect creates divisions and conflicts and many problems. Okay, thank you.
This intelligence, then it means it becomes another mystical word like Kundalini, awakening of Kundalini or awakening of intelligence. Both this also again becomes mystical, seems to be.
Yeah. Yes. Because our knowledge is limited, and our knowledge is gained through thinking only. But there is a dimension of, like, knowledge is just a drop in the ocean of unknown. And the scientists are slowly expanding the boundary of knowledge. But so many things, even the scientists, they don't know from where the mind comes, their own mind. They can investigate brain with their instruments, with their intellect. They can investigate brain because it is a physical matter, but the mind is not matter. So to look at mind, to understand, it requires something else than intellect. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Is there any question or should I
Yeah.
finish it? Is there any question? Riya K, please unmute and ask. Ravi K, please unmute and ask. Ravi J K, please unmute and ask. You
Hello.
are raising hand but not
Am I,
asking.
am I audible?
Yeah.
Am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah.
Sure.
Very well audible. Very well audible. Please ask.
Yes, sir. Sir, when we're talking about this intelligence and when we're referring, it always is something. So therefore, we are always talking about something materialistic as far as that intelligence that we're talking about. So the language to describe, the language to refer, seems to be very, hinting at only the material part of that intelligence, which we kind of feel that Krishnaji was with. I mean, am I sounding?
No, if I may suggest,
Ji, Tankha
I
ji.
think that's a rather, I think that there is a limitation of words and language. And we have to recognize that when we talk about these things that sound a little bit mystical or beyond the ken of the known, that we have to see logic, see language more like a poet uses language, more metaphorically, more that it is meaning more than the words are saying, it's meaning more than the material. Poets use it to refer to emotions and things, but Krishnaji is pushing it beyond that as well. So language can be used as a pointer. It can be used more metaphorically and poetically. So, and when I learned poetry in school, they taught me that read the words and then stop and think what the poet might have meant by this. What is he trying to get at? Rather than the immediate meaning of the word that is on the surface. So I think that approach to language, where we are actively trying to figure what lies behind the words, is Krishnaji himself says that. He says, don't be passive during a talk. Are you working? Are you actively exploring this with me? Are you? Because if you're just listening and taking the words, then he gets very upset with his audience sometimes when he thinks that they're just sitting there and taking in the words. So you have to be listening actively and trying to see what people might be referring to underneath, behind the words.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
May I say something?
Yeah, please.
Yes.
Please.
Yes. Krishnaji also said, the word is not the thing. That
Yeah.
means, like to one artist, Krishnaji said, the word parrot has blocked you from looking at the thing which flies. So after we learn the language and we gather so much knowledge, and we are looking, thinking everything through that knowledge, through the language, but there is a dimension, the real spiritual dimension, what we call, is beyond the word. And only when such a thing happens in the life of a person, then he will say that language or knowledge is limited. There is a dimension where we can look at bird or animal or human beings as if we are looking for the first time. In that there is a freshness, real beauty, love, all that exists when this language, intellect is not blocking it. So love is when the self is not. That is what Krishnaji said. And it seems that it is true, because this self, I, me, then will create you, and then there is a conflict. But when there is no I, everything is like there is no division. And that state, the real state, not the description of that state, but the real feeling, when it comes, then we really see the beauty of it. And then we say, yes, Krishnaji is right. Otherwise, it may be intellectual. Okay, I finish.
Thank you very much. It is
So
already
can I?
finished.
Yes, sir.
So thank you. Thanks to every speaker, every participant, and to everybody. So please close it. It is already 7:31. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.